Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is James Wynn, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Attorney Credits. In today's webinar presentation, we will be discussing the power of personal branding. Whether you work at a large law firm or you're working solo, you can't wake up one day, decide to focus on business development, and expect instant results. One of the keys to building a profitable and sustainable book of business is by creating a strong personal brand, both online and offline. To discuss this topic in greater detail, please welcome Jay Harrington. Jay, welcome.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here and welcome everyone. I'm by trade, I'm a consultant and coach to lawyers. I'm a lawyer myself as well, although I no longer practice. When I did, I started my career at law firm of Skadden Arps in Chicago as a corporate bankruptcy attorney. I worked at a couple of other different firms before starting my own, before entering into this new venture, professional venture, in which I'm the co-founder of an agency called HARRINGTON Communications, which serves lawyers and law firms, provides creative services, and as I mentioned, coaching and business development training to lawyers. So it's great to be here. I'm also, I'll mention, author of a book that was released last summer in 2016, published by Attorney at Work, called One of a Kind, A Proven Path to a Profitable Law Practice. And that book dives deeper into some of the issues we're going to talk about today related to building a powerful personal brand. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can find it at oneofakindlawyer.com. And before we get started here today, I just wanted to mention, to the extent that anyone has questions, and we do encourage questions, there is a Q&A button on your dashboard that you can submit questions to, and then at the end of my presentation, we'll address those questions and hopefully provide good answers to them. So go ahead and submit questions throughout the presentation as you have them, and like I said, we'll get to them as we move forward. So I just want to mention my goal today, which is generally twofold. First, it's to help you understand the importance of building a powerful personal brand as a lawyer in general, and then more specifically, how to leverage your personal brand and navigate in today's digital landscape. So I know you've heard it over and over. I'm sure you've heard it many times before, and it's true. In today's knowledge economy, lawyers need to project a strong presence online. So that's what we'll be talking about. But before we do, I want to take a step back and go back in time a little bit and talk about an anecdote from the classic movie Glengarry Glen Ross from the 1970s. And as you can see here, Alec Baldwin on screen. And in the movie, his character Blake is brought in to whip a bunch of underperforming real estate salesmen into shape. And it's one of the signature scenes of the movie, if you've ever seen it. And in it, he uses the acronym that you see here on the screen, ABC, which stands for Always Be Closing, to drive his point home. Now, I think, always be closing may work really well as a tactic in selling high-end real estate, which was the topic of the movie. But I think it's really a terrible approach to think about when it comes to developing high-end and developing and selling high-end legal services. While the hard sell approach may work in many other industries, it doesn't work well in ours. But that being said, if we attach a different meaning to the ABC acronym, it does in fact work quite well as an entry point to the discussion I want to have with you today, which is what it takes to build a strong personal brand online. So what are the ABCs of brand building? I think first of all, you need to think about it in terms of a focus on long-term relationship building. And again, not the hard sell. And so what this means is that in order to build relationships, and particularly to build them online, you need to always be connecting, forming those real, authentic connections that bear fruit down the road. Always be creating. In the context of operating online, that means creating valuable, relevant content. Always be communicating, which means staying top of mind with your connections. And then finally, always building community, working to strengthen and uplift those around you. And so I think if you can find the time to prioritize these things, which are connecting, creating, communicating, and building community, you'll never have to sell, at least in the way that Alec Baldwin's character suggests to do it, in your entirety of your career, and at least not in the traditional sense. If you think about it, and to give you another metaphor or analogy, it's like the difference between hunting and farming. So if you act like a hunter in your approach to business development and brand building, you'll spend your time scouting for prospects and pursuing people. If you think about a hunter, his prey runs from him like a deer and often only relents once it gets tired of being stalked. Now, if you can act like a farmer, you'll plant seeds among your prospects, you water them and nurture them and help them to grow. And what I really want to get across in our time together this afternoon is, and depending on where you are in the morning, is being committed to becoming a farmer in your approach to building your brand, which means that you need to have the mindset that business development and brand building is not simply an activity that you engage in or some tactic that you execute. It's not a technique or sort of a career hack to engage in. Rather, it becomes a byproduct of a set of learned and practiced behaviors and beliefs that you cultivate over long periods of time. This is not a short-term thing, it's a long-term approach. And if you cultivate these over a long enough period of time, they'll become so deeply ingrained into your professional DNA that business starts coming to you. You're able to harvest it and you don't have to hunt for it. And so all of this is to say, and as a setup to what we're going to dive into, that everything you do or don't do at every step and stage of your career either is additive or subtracts from your ability to generate business in this legal industry that we're participating in, which is one I think that values and rewards things like trust and reputation more than any other. And so in order to position yourself for business development success, you need to focus on building your personal brand from day one. And so let's talk about personal brand a little bit. And I don't think there's any great dictionary definition for what it is, but one of the most often cited colloquial definitions that you'll hear is from Jeff Bezos, which is your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think, in other words, what that means is your personal brand is what sells you when you're not there to sell yourself. And I think that's really powerful because if you think about it, I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of scaling a business. Well, the only way to scale yourself really, particularly in professional services, is to build your personal brand. And so if a client is going to buy from you, they really need to understand things like who you are as a person, what you stand for, what potential value you can bring to the table. And this is what your personal brand can help you to communicate. And so let's talk for a minute about the process of building a personal brand online. I'll say online, it really works the same way online and offline, but I know we're talking about particularly online, the context of online brand building today. So there's really 4 steps in the process. And these include and need to be approached in this particular order. First, understanding who you serve. Once you do that, focusing on creating awareness online. That in turn allows you to form relationships built on a foundation of trust and allows those online relationships to move offline. And finally, once you've done all those things, you'll be in a position to develop business in a manner proportionate to the amount of trust earned and skill you've acquired over the course of your career. It's a sequential process that ultimately leads to the opportunity to develop business from someone who you now have rapport and credibility with. We can view this a little more visually through this flowchart. So if you look at the steps here, it starts with, again, determining who you serve, kind of what niche you're targeting and serving. Second, executing on core brand building strategies. And that's what we do to create awareness. Once we've gained awareness, we'll have the opportunity for them to check out our foundation. And what that means oftentimes is they'll go online and they'll check you out. They'll find out your background, your experience, what kind of specialties you focus on. At that point, one of two things will happen. If your foundation is shaky, or it's just too early, or they determine that your expertise and experience is not for them, at that point they may, drop off the radar. But in many instances, at that point, if they find your foundation to be sort of aligned with their needs or potentially aligned with their needs, at that point they'll give you the opportunity to earn their trust. And how you earn their trust, and again, in the context of this online marketing world, is by you giving freely of your wisdom and advice and being helpful and essentially doing all the things needed to sort of build trust online. And we'll talk about those things in detail as we move forward. You do all those things and you wait patiently. And then when the time is right, you'll be in a position to develop business again in a manner proportionate to the amount of trust you've earned and skill acquired over the course of your career. So let's first talk a little bit more deeply about the issue of who you serve, because I think that's, if you're talking about building your personal brand, it really comes down to making a choice between who you're trying to communicate with, who you're trying to target as a client, and who you want to pay attention to you, both online and offline. And so really, before we start talking about the issue of how do we create awareness for ourselves, we need to answer the question of awareness of what. So we need to know who we serve. And that really requires you to answer and think deeply and introspectively about a couple of questions. First is, who do you want to serve? And we'll talk about that again in more detail. And then what specific value will you provide for them? And what that really gets into is the fact that in today's competitive environment and the knowledge economy that we all participate in, you need to offer the marketplace something different in the form of narrow, specialized expertise. So you need to know specifically who you serve. And that's not to say that being a well-rounded lawyer is a bad thing. Certainly a lawyer with depth and breadth of knowledge is a valuable asset to a client. The problem is, though, that positioning yourself as someone who provides full service or who possesses general knowledge is often ineffective from a brand building standpoint. When you're trying to set yourself apart, trying to be all things to all people, again, is ineffective. And that's because in all aspects of today's economy, consumers are trending towards specialization. Let's take the medical field, for example. When you have a cold or the flu, what do? You go out to your car, you drive to the doctor's office, and you see the general practitioner who may send you away with a prescription or advice to get some rest. But if you have something much more serious like heart blockage or cancer, oftentimes you'll seek out the best expert in the field, get on a plane, and go and seek out the diagnosis and prescribe treatment from that person. In that instance, the specialist isn't seeking you out, you're seeking them out. And so the same is true to a great extent in the legal marketplace. When it comes to identifying who you serve, the idea is, and what you're aspiring to, is to try to become known as the best or nearly the best in your narrow market. And notice I said narrow and not small when speaking about markets to pursue. Most narrow markets are quite big, but you need to penetrate it deeply and really stand out in order to reap those benefits. So I think the difference here between a generalist and a specialist, someone who's perceived as an expert in the marketplace, is best described as the difference between a jack of all trades and a master craftsman. And the jack of all trades has certain characteristics, and in the context of a legal practice, I think the following describes the jack of all trades. It's someone who's bouncing from project to project, someone who has been able to learn a little bit about a lot, So he's got a very broad practice. As a result, he's reactive to opportunities rather than being proactive about his strategy. Clients oftentimes think of a jack of all trades when price is a primary consideration. And for someone in this position, it's difficult, if not impossible, to gain traction and really build a big practice because you're always shifting gears. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is the master craftsman, who's busy but very focused. This is a lawyer who knows a lot about a little, and is able to charge a price premium as a result. When it comes to referral sources, they often think of this type of lawyer when a particular type of expertise is required. This lawyer is frequently on the short list when a potential client requests a referral from other lawyers, or is the only lawyer on the list. She doesn't need to get up to speed on issues. In most instances, she's able to answer questions and determine a plan of action when confronted with an issue instinctually. And importantly, she's also able to quickly validate whether a particular client is appropriate for her practice. As a result, she turns away far more work than her jack of all trades counterpart, but the work she does take on aligns with her experience, expertise, and interests very cleanly. And as a result, she's able to earn oftentimes more than her jack of all trades counterpart, who spends a great deal more time both developing and completing new business opportunities. Now, those are two ends of the spectrum. And I think most lawyers fall somewhere in the middle. They don't try to be all things to all clients, but they definitely like to keep their options open. I think this is best exemplified by the large number of practice areas that many lawyers list on, for example, their website bios. So the idea, though, or the problem with that is that each decision a lawyer makes to cast a wider net makes it less clear to the marketplace what the lawyer does. And what results from that is that the lawyer is generally relevant to many, but specifically relevant to few. And one of the keys, though, to build a powerful personal brand is to become that type of lawyer that becomes relevant to a specific few. And so you want to become a master craftsman who really digs deep with his practice and not wide. Now, that can require some hard choices, obviously. Many times we think that by narrowing the choices that we give to potential clients, the less business will develop. And I understand that instinct, but the exact opposite in practice is usually the case. So making those hard choices requires you to look at your background and ask yourself 3 questions. And those 3 questions are, what type of work do I like to do? What type of work am I good at? And what opportunities exist in the marketplace? In other words, are people buying what I'd like to sell? And so those questions are what's represented in this Venn diagram, which is deals with your interests, what you like to do, your experience, what you're good at, and market opportunities. And if you can find some commonality among those 3 things, you'll be in good shape when it comes to determining a practice niche. But here's the thing, and again, for anyone who's apprehensive about narrowing the focus of their practice, you don't always need to stay narrow. You can branch out over time. The problem is, if you try to do everything at once, you probably won't do any of them particularly well. So the idea is to do A before B and then B before C. It's a sequential process, again, where you're developing expertise, becoming known for it, developing business as a result, and then branching out from there. Not trying to do everything at once. One of the best known and I think most powerful examples of niching strategy and building a personal brand around one particular practice area is my former boss, the legendary Joe Flom of Skadden Arps, who during his career, particularly in the 1970s and 80s, became known as the go-to lawyer among lawyers in the hostile takeover space, and sort of corporate raids and the leverage buyouts of the 70s and 80s. Once he became known as the go-to lawyer in that space, the relatively little known firm of Skadden then built itself into what it became and what it's become on his shoulders as a result. So it's an example of the fact that just narrowing in on a particular area oftentimes results in a much broader practice. And so the point is, when it comes to establishing a niche, less often leads to more. So that's a quick run through, sort of the idea of having a focus to your practice and the importance of it. And so once we do that, if you remember the steps, we can start talking about gaining awareness. So once we know what our brand is, we can then go out and start marketing our brand and gaining awareness among our prospects. And that involves a focus on certain core brand building strategies, and there are generally 6. There's other things, but I think these are core to most brand building, which are networking outside the firm, entrepreneurship within the firm, referral strategies, speaking strategies, writing strategies, and internet-based strategies. Excuse me. And one of the things I often get asked, as a marketing consultant is, what tactic works best? What's the most powerful, effective marketing tactic that I can spend my limited time doing? And my answer is, they all work. They all work great. But if you try to do them all at once, chances are none of them will work. It's really the same principle as focusing your practice into a niche. You need to focus your marketing activities into various niches as well. But the key thing is to figure out which one works best for you. And so my approach is always to say, okay, if you have a goal for yourself, sort of try out and experiment with various marketing tactics. That's one of the reasons it's important to do this stuff consistently and over the long term. And by trying things and experimenting, you can determine what you like, and then more importantly, what you have aptitude for. And so instead of this kind of approach where you're doing a bunch of things and you're trying to see what works, and you just keep trying and trying to see if something, throwing things against the wall and hoping they stick, I suggest a more strategic approach to your marketing activity, which is sort of working up to, the few things that you do particularly well and going all in on those strategies. Trying to do everything at once is like multitasking. You never really will gain momentum if you keep shifting your focus, and you'll never gain mastery over any particular approach. Really, I think many people preach the importance of working on your weaknesses, but I think in the context of the practice of law, where knowing how busy all of you are and how much limited time you have to focus on marketing and business development, I think a better approach is figuring out, again, what you have a natural aptitude for, and then going all in on your strengths. So what we're talking about today, though, specifically, is the 6th strategy that I identified, which is internet-based strategies. And whether or not you determine that an internet-based strategy is your one thing, or something that you have an aptitude for, or that you enjoy doing, or that bears success, I think it's undeniable that most lawyers must project a powerful presence online. The internet is the first place that most prospective clients go to research and review background of lawyers who they're considering working with, and to determine if there's alignment between their needs and objectives and your expertise and experience. Online is also the place where lawyers get discovered in the first place, be it through search or thought leadership that they place into the marketplace of ideas. And therefore, it's critical that you spend time, and not necessarily a large amount of time, but rather the appropriate amount of time, building a powerful personal brand online. So the way I want to approach this is to discuss 5 things that I believe to be true about building your personal brand online, and then turn to 5 rules that I think should help guide your behavior online to make your time most effective and productive and rewarding. And all of these things, the 5 truths and the 5 rules, as I've phrased it here, are meant and geared towards the objective of helping you optimize your personal brand. So let's start with truth number 1, which is that time invested online is directly proportionate to perceived value. And in other words, we invest in activities, or at least we should, that we believe will have a high return on investment. And this is meant to address something I hear quite often when it comes to consulting with lawyers, and the issue of social networks and internet-based strategies comes up. And when asked why when asked why they don't spend more time on social networks, the typical response that lawyers give is, "I don't have the time." And what I think that really means is, in most instances, that they don't see the value, because we don't spend time doing things that we don't perceive as valuable. And this is the corollary is, just as any value-creating business idea attracts an investment of capital, a value-creating marketing activity attracts an investment of time. And the reason I raise this is because many lawyers I work with, again, dismiss online and social media activity as somewhat of a trifling waste of time, really, the domain of their teenage children, and not worthy of the time of a busy, sophisticated lawyer. And I start with this because this is one of the things that I hope to disprove, this notion that online activity is a waste of time in our brief time here together. And that brings us to truth number 2, which addresses one of the most important benefits of internet-based strategies. And that's that social interaction online allows you to take online conversations offline. And online activity is rarely, primarily, or even significantly responsible for new business development. And I think that's important because I don't want to overpromise the benefit of social selling or internet activity. But importantly, it does help move the ball forward. It's really, I'd like to describe it as an additive tool or a nurturing tool for your broader business development toolkit. It's also a great prospecting tool and a relationship building tool. It's not a tool to close deals, but it is a tool to nurture nurture that closing forward. When I say closing, I mean, developing that relationship that ultimately leads to business. And let me give you an example from my own experience, which maybe will help just, illustrate the point. Again, I'm a coach and consultant for lawyers primarily. I write books and articles, and I share what I write online. And I do so primarily through my blog, my email list, and LinkedIn. And this is the primary means through which I generate new business. Of course, I'm not chasing legal work, but really I'm a knowledge worker in another domain. And it's a process similar to developing new business in the legal industry. It's very similar. There are other ways to do it, but this is the approach that I like to take. Rarely do I interact directly with my audience and followers and readers other than through a one-way conversation online involving content sharing. I sometimes will get feedback in the form of comments or an occasional email, but for the most part, I put content out there and I don't really know who's reading it or sharing it. But over time, a not insignificant number of those online relationships move offline. Sometimes it'll be a lawyer or a marketing director at a law firm who will reach out to me directly after reading something I wrote, and they'll want to learn more about how I can dive deeper into an issue that I've written about or spoken about in the context of a paid engagement. Or let's say I'm traveling to another city, I'll review my LinkedIn contacts to see who works there, determine if any of those people ring a bell as someone who engages with my content, and then I'll seek to set up a meeting with them. Or many times, you'll attend a conference or some other networking event and meet someone and then learn that they follow your content online. That happens to me often. Run into someone, they'll say, "Oh, I subscribe to your blog." the point is, and the benefit again of spending time and investing time online is that instead of then beginning these conversations cold, there's already some rapport and some trust and credibility established, sometimes built over a number of years, that propels the offline conversation that we're now having past pleasantries and some of the awkward moments of introductory remarks, and allows my prospect to let their guard down a little bit. And so as a result, by being active online, I'm able to nurture my network and be more effective with them offline. And speaking of networks, one of the problems that all of us in professional services face is the challenge of keeping up with what's often a large and unwieldy network of contacts, including clients and colleagues and referral sources that we rely upon. You may have heard of this concept called Dunbar's number, but it's an idea that suggests that our brains can only manage 150 relationships at a time, be it personal or business, at any one given point in time. And so when our networks get too big, it becomes difficult to manage them. We try to keep up with all the loose relationships we have, and consequently we struggle to develop deep ones that we need in order to build the trust required to develop business. And so for many of the reasons I described when I was discussing the benefits of sharing my own content online, social media in particular allows you to overcome the constraints of Dunbar's number by maintaining contact with a larger number of people with the simple click of a button. And that brings us to truth number 3, which is social interactions help move prospects along the buyer's journey. And as we discussed, social interactions online help in moving online conversations offline, where they can become more personal and contextualized. And this is critical when it comes to moving prospects along the buyer's journey. I really think too little attention is paid to buyers' behaviors and motivations in legal business development. It's just not something that we often talk about, but it's important to, because you're not, as a legal service provider, you're certainly not selling a commodity, a circumstance where transactions can happen very quickly. Selling legal services requires going on a journey with the buyer, often over a long period of time. And trust is again, a precursor to anyone engaging in buying, and for that buying experience to take place. And through your content, you can spark interest in the change required to develop business. The buyer's journey usually involves 3 steps. It's first generating awareness, and what this really means is telling and convincing the potential buyer why they need to change in the first place. Most buyers already are working with lawyers and law firms, so you need to spark some interest in them as to why they need to change in the first place. The second step in the buyer's journey is creating interest, not just that change is necessary, but how to, convincing them and explaining to them how they change. And then the final step in the buyer's journey is action, which involves helping them make the decision and come to the decision of who will help me change. So obviously, if they're going to make a change, you want them to make the change with you, and your online activity can help move them along in this buyer's journey, so that when the moment is right and the urge for change is acute, the person reaches out to the content creator or the insight provider online who inspired the urge for change in the first place. Let me just give you an example of that. Let's say you're a healthcare lawyer who stays on the cutting edge of legislative and regulatory changes associated with HIPAA and the Affordable Care Act, and writes about his or her insights and shares them online. To the extent that a prospective client that, who again is likely using another firm comes across those insights, and those insights divulge information that their current firm is not sharing as quickly or at all, then the content creator is well positioned to capitalize on the new opportunity. By sharing the content, they've identified a reason to change. Through the insight shared, how that change can happen. And then again, by being the person that brings those insights to the potential buyer, becomes positioned to be the party that the client changes to. So the point is that online interaction, even if it's just sharing your content online, can help move a prospect along the buyer's journey and towards you specifically without you even really knowing it. Again, a lot of this stuff happens in the background, but it doesn't happen quickly. And that's another thing I want to emphasize, that this is a long-term journey. And so the way you want to approach it is 1 yard at a time, to use a football analogy. And if you're familiar with Woody Hayes, the former Ohio State football coach, he was famous for running an offense that was focused on 3 yards in a cloud of dust, which was kind of running the ball up the middle, moving slowly down and efficiently down the field. And that's how you want to approach it. The corollary to that is the Earl Weaver approach. Earl Weaver was a former manager of the Baltimore Orioles, to use a baseball analogy, who relied on the 3-run homer, kind of the big hit, the big score, to win the game. So if you want to approach, the way you want to approach social interaction online and online selling is using the Woody Hayes approach of 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And that brings us to truth number 4, which is that social media allows you to have these contextualized conversations offline that I mentioned before. Engaging in activity online, by doing so, you can introduce yourself without ever meeting face-to-face with a prospect, so that if and when you do have a personal interaction, you can quickly move past those introductory and often awkward small talk and pleasantries, and the prospect lets his or her guard down a little bit. And even if there is no connection online, you can still conduct research and human intel about a prospect online in order to determine what their interests are, which of course is critical when approaching a new potential relationship. You find out what they care about and what interests they have. The goal of business development, after all, is to build trust and rapport. So the more you know about someone, the more context you can have to have a meaningful conversation once you do. Truth number 5, social interaction is a first small step towards becoming a trusted advisor. And we all aspire to the title or the moniker of trusted advisor when it comes to the practice of law. It's something that clients desire, and it's something that we also, again, aspire to. But we often forget what is required to become a trusted advisor, become perceived as a trusted advisor. And it's 2 things. It's both trust and advice. But before you can gain trust, you typically need to demonstrate that you can effectively provide advice. As we've discussed, lawyers who build powerful personal brands share their insights and advice online, which again is a first step towards developing that trust you need to be able to develop business. Okay, so those are 5 truths. Let's move now to the 5 rules that should guide your behavior online. And the first is use social media sparsely and sparingly. Now, this may sound like a paradox because of the topic we're discussing today. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't spend time online and on social networks. Of course, I've been suggesting the exact opposite throughout the 30 or so minutes we've been speaking today. But what I am saying is that the time you do spend online must be very purposeful and intentional. And here's why. Social media platforms are engineered to be addictive. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram and other social media platforms, they grow and they get paid based on how many people use their platforms and for how long. So in this sense, companies are competing in this attention economy for your attention. And in a way, we are the products that these companies sell. They round up our attention and they sell it to advertisers. Accordingly, it's not surprising that social media platforms are engineered to be as addictive as possible. And since they're engineered to be addictive, and they often are, they pull us away from what's most important. And as knowledge workers, the most valuable asset that we have is our attention. And to perform at the highest levels, a lawyer must bring undivided focus to his or her work for long periods of time. And so, of course, time spent on social media is antithetical to that. And so in my opinion, I'd say that the potential downsides to social media actually outweigh, and in fact, greatly outweigh the potential upsides. If you're someone who's spending time and using social media as a form of entertainment or escapism, then of course, and can't seem to move away from that, I'd suggest not being on the platforms at all. But if you do have the self-discipline to use social media effectively and not as a form of escapism, entertainment, especially during work hours, and use it only during, say, short and predetermined and pre-scheduled blocks of time on your calendar, then it can be effective. So again, sparse and sparing is the way to go when it comes to social media use, because really the power of the brand you can build online is dictated more by the value you can create offline, which leads us to rule number 2, which is, okay, so how should I act online? And I think that the way to act, the way to avoid the trap of social media is to act like a media company and not a consumer of media. You want to be behind the mic, so to speak, producing the content that other people are consuming and in some cases paying for. Again, social media platforms at their core are virtually the same as every other form of media, whether it be TV or radio or print publishing, in the sense that they're engineered to deliver content. But of course, the one big difference between social media platforms and other traditional media platforms is that social media relies on user-generated content. And so this can present a strategic opportunity for smart lawyers. If you act like and get the mindset of a publisher or broadcaster on social media, as opposed to a consumer, like a reader or listener or viewer, then you can leverage social media more effectively to your advantage in terms of gaining attention and building a network. So that means treating time spent on social media as a job, and again, not as a form of entertainment. You want to be focused on being a publisher of content and not a consumer of it. You want to be developing valuable insights and content offline, sharing them online, and then moving back to producing valuable insights and advice offline, if that makes sense. So rule number 3, and this sort of is a corollary to what we discussed. You want to be focused on building a community and not a following online. And so, there's the old saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, I think to many lawyers, again, this gets back to the issue of niching, everyone is a potential client. And again, as we discussed, the truth is, if you try to be all things to all people, you'll be relevant to no one. And the same is true online. Everyone is not a potential client. So the goal of your online activity should not be to build as big of a following as possible on social media, for example, which, unless you're otherwise well known, will require a tremendous amount of time and activity on social media platforms, time you can't afford. The better approach is a more strategic one, where your time spent on social media should not be spent trying to build a large following, but rather building a community of the right type of people. And when I say that, I mean specifically those who fit within the niche you're targeting, and then be of service to its members. So again, it's a strategic approach. It's a targeted approach to your time spent on social media. Which brings us to rule number 4. In order to build those relationships and gain trust, you need to give freely of yourself. You must impart wisdom and insights and be helpful with no expectation of reciprocity, at least in the short term. It's obvious when people are out there trying to, sell online or sell on social media, and that again is antithetical to the objective of building relationships built on trust. But it takes a longer term approach. And understanding this approach reflects an understanding of the difference between marketing and business development. Marketing at its core is about messaging and positioning. It presents the firm and its lawyers holistically in a macro environment. It's often general and sometimes platitudinous. It uses and relies upon adjectives, things like experienced, trusted, aggressive, in order to demonstrate differentiation. Marketing, obviously, is oftentimes spearheaded by non-lawyers in a firm, by the marketing department itself. And it's distinct from business development, which is what lawyers are engaged in. And business development, as opposed to marketing, is all about nurturing. It's all about relationship building. It involves a more personal conversation around value and creating preferences and gaining commitments. And lawyers can't approach business development with platitudes. If they're targeting a specific audience, they must be very specific and strategic about what they want to share with that audience, or what they should share with that audience. And this means that lawyers need to get the intellectual property that exists in their heads and the insights in their minds out of their minds and in front of prospects if they want to build a personal brand and be perceived as experts. It's the marketing department at your firm is not capable of having those, again, specific and contextualized conversations with the target audience that you're focused on as an individual business developing lawyer. They, again, can have larger contextual larger holistic messaging and conversations with the world at large, to a great extent, about the firm via its marketing messages. But those individual, more specific business development conversations need to come from the lawyer specifically. And one way to do this is through your writing. Which is, again, if you're talking about online and internet-based strategies, there's other ways to do it: video, podcasting, things like that. But oftentimes lawyers are more comfortable writing, so we want to talk about that a little bit today and how you can do that most effectively. And so implicit in everything we've spoken about today is the principle that consumers of legal services desire, above all else, expertise. And unless expertise can be conveyed and validated through your referral from someone else, or your own reputation that precedes you, it must be demonstrated through thought leadership expressed in the marketplace of ideas. And by generating and disseminating and sharing compelling, thoughtful, written content, you're able to build trust and gain awareness and position yourself as the content creator, as an expert. Again, it's the long game with a focus on relationship building and not the hard sell that we spoke about earlier. But, while writing and content marketing, as you might want to call it, is not the hard sell, it is selling. And here's how it works. And it's selling over the long term. And I think we all have an orbit of people, consisting of people and companies and organizations, prospective clients, sometimes current clients, who encircle us. And our content can serve as gravity that keeps people and contacts within your orbit. Those who become aware of you stay aware of you as a result of your content. And those not in your orbit will oftentimes move into it after becoming exposed to your content. When someone who is in your orbit then experiences a problem or is presented with an opportunity that relates to an issue or an area that you have written on, you'll oftentimes then be high on that person's list as someone who possesses the requisite knowledge and experience to either, depending on the circumstances, overcome the problem or seize the opportunity. And while your reader may not be ready to act immediately, again, as I mentioned, this is a long-term proposition, continued thought leadership in the form of written content will help keep you top of mind. And when the time is right, you'll be able to shift that relationship from one of reader-writer to client-attorney. And so I want to give you here 3 quick tips for more effectively sharing content online. The first is, rather than focusing exclusively on your internal platforms, let's say you maintain a blog or your firm does, look for opportunities to share content on outside platforms. If you're simply sharing content on your internal platforms, you're speaking to the same audience every week, by and large. Sure, that audience may grow slowly and organically over time, but by publishing on other respected platforms that are targeted towards your niche, you can greatly expand the power of your words. Generate ideas from your work. this is the idea of taking a look at and really mining insights from the work you do on a daily basis. The most powerful content is content that's derived from the problems that your clients face. And every engagement, every project oftentimes reveals insights that are probably broadly applicable to your target audience, that you can create content around and share and gain benefit from as a result. And then finally, have a bias towards evergreen content. Oftentimes, I find in working with clients and law firms and developing content marketing strategy, a great deal of their content is temporal in nature, meaning it's time-based. It's, they get an article done when the state Supreme Court releases an opinion, and everyone, they produce that content. It's timely. They get it out to their clients, and every other law firm in the world does the same thing. And so as a result, it's not particularly effective. Evergreen content, on the other hand, is something more lasting. It's a deeper dive into issues. Instead of just saying what happened, you write about the implications, and you go really deep on the issue of what happened. And that's the type of content that lives over time, that allows you to be discovered online, and that has a lasting impact and really helps build your reputation. It takes more work, but it has much greater impact. I'd suggest, one really deep, effective, evergreen article has more impact than 100 just sort of, surface level, topical, temporal articles that everyone else is writing. And finally, this brings us to rule number 5, which is understand and appreciate your own lack of credibility. And I should have added online, but I think that's implicit based on what we're talking about here. And what I mean here is not that you lack credibility in general. It just means that unless and until you create a powerful personal brand that precedes you, you lack a certain amount of credibility with prospects. They don't know you. They don't know you from any other lawyer out there. So, in a sales situation, the prospect almost always has its guard up, and your personal brand, your reputation, which can help enhance your perceived credibility, can soften things up a little bit. And one great way to do this and to build credibility is to leverage the concept of social proof, through which your association with influencers who already have credibility with your prospect. So you essentially gain social proof. You gain credibility through associating with others who already have credibility with the people you're trying to target. So let's assume for a second that this brick wall that you're looking at stands in the way of you reaching your prospect. The brick wall serves as a metaphor for a prospect keeping you at arm's length in a sales discussion. And let's say that you want to get the prospect and you want to get to the prospect and enhance your reputation by sharing thought leadership. And the problem is, with all of the noise and activity and other content creators online, and given that you lack credibility and capital with the prospect, you can't penetrate the brick wall. And again, let's say the black line in this instance represents that brick wall. But there are people and platforms who already have made it through the brick wall and already live within the prospect's ecosystem. These people and organizations, and in this case, let's call them influencers, they're already viewed by the prospect as credible. And so let's go back to the example of the healthcare lawyer who's interested in building trust and influence with a hospital administrator, for example. The hospital administrator may not give the lawyer and his or her content the time of day, but the administrator, in order to stay up to speed on the issues of the day, relies greatly on a publication like Modern Healthcare. So Modern Healthcare already has credibility. It's already within the prospect's ecosystem. Well, one way to reach the administrator and do an end around the brick wall is to publish a piece of content on an influencer platform, again, that is already within the administrator's ecosystem. And this goes back to the benefit of publishing on outside platforms. By publishing on the influencer platform, the lawyer is now perceived as trustworthy and credible by the prospect. It's because the prospect and the influencer platform already has pre-vetted the lawyer and deemed his insights worthy of attention. Hence, the content reaches its intended target. So instead of, again, banging your head against the brick wall trying to reach the prospect, go through the influencer platform to reach your prospects. And so all of this is to say, these 5 rules and these 5 truths is to say that if you want to build your personal brand online, you just can't go through the motions. You need to be smart and strategic about what you're doing. You need to act and think a little bit differently. You certainly can't just keep doing the same thing or doing nothing at all and expect results. Certainly it takes time and effort to build your personal brand online, but I think at the end of the day, the payoff is well worth it. So at this point, I'll stop the formal part of the presentation. We can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Jay. We do have a question. How much time should you spend generating content on a weekly or monthly basis? And do you have any tips in terms of setting up a process so you could do this efficiently so that it kind of works with attorneys' overall schedule?
I do, and that's a great question. Here's my suggestion. I'll try to be very specific with it. I think that when you're thinking about creating content, definitely have a bias again towards evergreen, and that means that you want to have a bias of quality over quantity of content. So, I think a very effective content marketing strategy could involve creating one really solid piece of content per month. I think that's, I think that balances the idea that, especially if you're just getting into this, that's not too aggressive, but it's a good, consistent approach. So maybe shoot for one really strong piece of content a month. Try to find an outside platform to publish it on. And then in terms of how to do it, so let's say that's the strategy. What's the structure to build around your schedule in order to accomplish that? Well, I'd say do the following. On a daily basis, I'd spend 5 to 10 minutes doing what I suggested, which is thinking about your day's work and whether you came across any interesting insights, any issues that might have broad application to your prospects and your market. Jot those down, and then figure out a time during the week. It might be a Friday. It might be a Friday morning first thing where you block time on your calendar. You schedule, say, 2 to 2.5 hours with yourself, and and maybe not even that long at first. Start with an hour, say from 9 to 10 a.m. or something like that. Do nothing else but write, produce content during that block of time. Shut off notifications. Don't jump on email. Just write. That's 1 hour out of your week. If you do that every Friday, that's 4 hours. That should be enough time to get, say a 1,500 word piece done, and make that time sacrosanct. Over time, you may increase your blocks of time spent on content, but make it a ritual. Too many lawyers that I know have an intention of creating content. It's something on their to-do list, but they never schedule time with themselves on their calendar, blocked off to actually accomplish it.
Great, Jay. Thank you so much. Looks like that wraps up the Q&A section. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you join us for our next upcoming webinar next month. Thank you so much.